Today, we're focusing on defining the main characteristics of explanatory and pragmatic trials. Have you ever followed a recipe to the letter and it still didn't taste right? Maybe your oven is a little warmer. Maybe your ingredients weren't exactly what the cookbook used. You can think of explanatory trials like recipe tests in a high-end test kitchen. Same tools, same ingredients, same chef. But pragmatic trials? They're about testing that same recipe in the real world, where the flour brand changes, the pan is a little warped, and the chef might be a busy parent multitasking dinner. Here's what we'll cover today. First, we'll explore how explanatory and pragmatic trials differ. Then we'll dig into trials' internal and external validity. Finally, I'll introduce you to the PRECIS-2 Wheel, which helps map out where your trial lands on the explanatory-pragmatic spectrum. Let's start with the basics. A clinical trial is a structured study to test whether an intervention works, whether that is a pill, a procedure, or a new care model. Now, not all trials are created equal. Some are designed to test things in a lab-like setting, while others embrace the glorious messiness of real-world healthcare. Most fall somewhere in between. Explanatory trials are your classic lab coat and clipboard scenarios. Most things are tightly controlled. Who gets in, how the intervention is delivered, and how outcomes are measured. The goal here is internal validity, making sure that if the intervention works, we can be confident it wasn't due to chance, bias, or other sneaky variables. Now, contrast that with pragmatic trials. These take place in the real world. Think busy primary care clinics. They cast a wider net when it comes to participants and allow some wiggle room in how the intervention is delivered. The goal is to see, does this thing actually work in the real world with all its glorious chaos? So why make a big deal about explanatory versus pragmatic trials? It's because clearly defining the purpose helps everyone, researchers, clinicians, policymakers, understand what a trial can and cannot tell us. It guides everything from who participates, how interventions are delivered, right down to funding decisions. Ultimately, distinguishing trial types helps ensure the research doesn't just end up gathering dust on a shelf somewhere. It gets used to actually improve patient care. Clinical trials aren't black or white. There's a whole spectrum of gray in between. The PRECIS-2 Wheel helps researchers visualize exactly where their study sits on this explanatory to pragmatic spectrum. Imagine rating each domain, like patient eligibility or intervention flexibility, from 1, very controlled, to 5, totally practical. Connecting the dots forms your trial's unique footprint. It's incredibly useful for guiding real-world decisions about trial design and helping communicate to your partners about what the trial aims to accomplish. Think of the PRECIS-2 Wheel as a GPS for your trial design. Let's switch gears to the trial's validity. First, internal validity is about being absolutely sure that any effect you see is genuinely caused by your intervention, not by chance, not by biases, not by uncontrolled variables. Here is Dr. Merrick Zwerenstein, who is the senior author of the PRECIS-2 Wheel.
Randomization is the source of internal validity. It guarantees within statistical limits that known and unknown confounders, as well as non-specific factors like regression to the mean and measurement error, are equally distributed or balanced between the arms and thus cancel each other out. It means that any difference in outcomes between the arms is the net treatment effect, provided, of course, that the randomized trial was well conducted, which means here that allocation was concealed and loss to follow-up was minimal and equal between arms. We call this miracle of statistical science internal validity. Internal, because this valid estimate of effect is accurate only for participants in the trial, not for those who were approached for the trial but refused, who were excluded, who were lost to follow-up, or were somewhere else, or are future patients.
External validity is built on the foundation of internal validity. If we can't be confident that the observed effects are truly caused by the intervention, then any claims about broader applicability are meaningless. External validity describes how well trial findings apply to real-world patients, settings, and clinical practices the intervention is intended for. Others whose real world differs from that of the trial must decide whether the study context is similar enough to justify applying its results. Pragmatic trials enhance external validity by using broader eligibility criteria and aligning closely with routine care. So, should your trial prioritize external validity? Well, It depends on your goals. Are you testing whether a brand new treatment conceptually works? Lean towards explanatory. But if you're looking to inform clinical guidelines, policy, or actual care delivery, you'll lean pragmatic. It's all about your clinical question and trial's intention, who your partners are, and where you're conducting your trial. It is important to note that there is no inherent trade-off by leaning pragmatic. It is possible to intentionally include strategies for high internal and external validity. When we think about participant selection, explanatory trials define narrow criteria to minimize variability. It's precise. Pragmatic trials cast a wider net. They welcome diversity because that's who shows up in your actual clinic or hospital. Yes, it can appear messy, but far more realistic for general practice. Where does the trial happen? Explanatory trials often take place in specialized centers with highly controlled environments. Most things are neat, tidy, and predictable. Pragmatic trials embrace the mess. They happen in ordinary clinics and hospitals, reflecting day-to-day variability. The results from pragmatic trials are thus more directly useful in typical healthcare settings. How strictly must the intervention be followed? Explanatory trials require strict adherence to protocols. If you deviate, you risk biasing your treatment effect. Pragmatic trials, however, anticipate that life happens. Providers have varying levels of experience. Clinics run differently, and patients don't always adhere to the study protocol. They allow and embrace this variability. When it comes to outcomes, explanatory trials often measure biological or surrogate endpoints like blood tests, lab values, things that can be controlled and measured. Pragmatic trials go straight for what matters to patients and providers. Does the patient feel better? Are hospital visits reduced? Outcomes are often measured using existing data that clinics already collect. It's practical and directly meaningful. The All-Hat study is a pragmatic trial comparing the effect of doxazosin, an alpha blocker, with chlorthalidone, a diuretic, on incidence of CVD in patients with hypertension. The trial was conducted across various routine clinics, and it included a diverse patient group representative of typical clinical care practice. The trial used flexible intervention delivery to reflect everyday clinical reality, assessing outcomes that matter directly to providers and patients. The study found that doxazosin was associated with similar rates of coronary heart disease and all-cause mortality. However, there was a significantly higher risk of combined cardiovascular events and heart failure compared to chlorthalidone. These results were readily applicable to real-world practice. Pragmatic trials come with their own set of challenges. You're embracing variability, which can dilute effect sizes, making it harder to see a dramatic impact. Data collection can get messy. Clinics might capture data inconsistently. So, your team needs to be ready to manage variability without compromising rigor. It's a careful balancing act. Facing these pragmatic trial challenges head-on is key. First, create clear and straightforward protocols. If it doesn't fit into normal clinical workflow, it's likely going to be challenging. Make smart use of existing data, like electronic health records and administrative data sources, to ease collection burdens. Most importantly, engage partners early. They'll keep you honest about what can realistically happen in practice. Flexibility isn't failure, it's realism. Just document transparently. Before we wrap up, let's bust some myths. Pragmatic doesn't mean lower scientific rigor. It just shifts the focus from ideal conditions to realistic conditions. Likewise, explanatory trials aren't irrelevant. They set the scientific foundation. Remember, it's not either-or. Explanatory and pragmatic trials complement each other in moving research from discovery into practice. Here's a quick reference that you can download from the Rethinking Clinical Trials textbook published on the NIH Collaboratory website. We won't review it here, but it can be downloaded using the link in the description below. Keep it handy as you design, interpret, or evaluate clinical trials. The key takeaway is to clearly define whether your trial leans explanatory or pragmatic, as this isn't just an academic exercise. It's foundational to producing useful, actionable evidence. Pragmatic trials bridge that gap between research and practice, ensuring our efforts improve patient care in the real world. In the next module, we'll dive deeper into crafting pragmatic trial questions, how to set your trial up for success from the start.